And in fact, if you want to understand why this is such a huge deal and why people are being indicted and going to jail with manslaughter charges, the CDC wanted to investigate at this point right here, and the state said the outbreak's over, and they didn't want to tell anyone, and more people died after that point. So this shows you the sort of resistance and the problem that we have in dealing with these premise plumbing pathogen problems. No one wants to talk about it. So we were trying to recreate these conditions. So we've got a multi-pronged approach here, and again, we're doing this on a bootstrap because no one wants to hear the answers. So what we do is we got Flint River water as it existed and recreated it. You have to treat it a certain way, and of course you can get Detroit water now because that's what's in the system. And then we tried to simulate what was happening in the water main so that we could see how that would impact what happened in the consumer's house. So here's what we did is we treated this water, again, to recreate what happened before and after the outbreak. We were able to do that successfully based on our chemistry measurements. We then tried different distribution system approaches. So one idea is like, let's take Flint water and just put it in glass to indicate, like, what if we had a glass-lined or non-corrosive infrastructure? What would that do to the water? Then you have Flint water with no corrosion control, Flint water with corrosion control, but with iron in there to simulate what was happening with the iron mains. And we did the same thing with Detroit water. So that's the first step on the journey. How did that affect the water that was going into the homes? Could we prove that the utility and how we were operating and managing the system played a role? So this is sort of how we're doing it. We got this unlined iron wire here to simulate it. We think we're simulating it pretty well. So the idea is we want to track the levels of chlorine in the water and the levels of iron in the water to see, hey, what was happening? So this is a head-to-head comparison, and here you have the water representing what was happening at the end of the treatment plant. So it's nice and clean, everyone's happy, you're meeting all the EPA regulations. Again, this is the battle we love to fight, spending all this money on treatment plants, cleaning the water up there. So in the case of Flint River with no iron, you put in a pure glass bottle. We're going to track what happens to chlorine. You can see that's a good chlorine dose there, 3 milligrams per liter. Very difficult for bacteria to grow at that level of chlorine. This is the simulated Flint system with iron. See that little iron wire in there? So that's rusting. Same level, actually a higher level of chlorine. You have to have more chlorine to even have a hope to get it to the consumer's house with an unlined iron system. And Detroit, which had corrosion control, again, a high level of chlorine. So we're going to track this over the next 2 hours of this experiment and see what happens. So this is the one that we thought triggered the outbreak. This is the one where there was no outbreak, and this is what you'd have if you had a glass-lined distribution system. So after 30 minutes, you're starting to see the Flint water turn a little bit orange. We've gone from 3 down to 1.5 milligrams per liter. We've lost some chlorine over here. The Detroit water is very stable with corrosion control. Detroit water is staying high with chlorine, 2.4. In 1 hour, we're starting to lose a lot more chlorine in the Flint situation with no corrosion control. Again, Detroit water is holding up the best. 1 hour, 30 minutes, you're really starting to see this turn orange, but after an hour and 30 minutes, you've essentially lost all your disinfectant. So that was the problem. So you got iron in the water, see that? Orange. No disinfectant. If you had a glass-lined system, no iron, a lot of chlorine. Detroit water, even with the iron and corrosion control, because it's not corrosive, you're doing okay. So you were here, you were okay, now you're here, people are getting sick with Legionnaires' disease. And that's after 2 hours, 30 minutes. So we think we recreated what was happening during the crisis. Now the next thing is to say, okay, that's the utilities job. Now we met all those rules that the EPA said. If I measured that water in front of the house, the bacteria levels were low, right? And yeah, it was orange, but iron doesn't hurt anyone, okay? So we've done our job. But have they? Is what happened before the house going to influence what happens to Legionella in the home? So to simulate that, we created a situation with both copper and PVC pipe to see, hey, what would happen if you had the two different types of plumbing materials. So we changed the water. We incubated it at a temperature where Legionella likes to grow. And we looked for when Legionella grew, and what we discovered was if you had copper, pretty much you would kill off the Legionella in both cases. There was more Legionella in the Flint water after a few weeks, but Detroit water had undetectable Legionella. But if you went to the situation where you have PVC in the building plumbing, copper has some bacteriostatic properties. So in the plastic, basically in Detroit, the chlorine was going high in. You were wiping out the Legionella, but in Flint water it was able to grow. So that's the situation. So we feel like we recreated the situation associated with this outbreak. Now earlier today, we learned that we've got financially unsustainable systems, both at the world, national, and local level. So this is the reality of the world we live in, declining discretionary resources. And frankly, Flint's not alone. Flint's only ahead of the curve in terms of going bankrupt. And we saw what happened there, where 100,000 Americans lost civilization as we know it. Their vital infrastructure was destroyed. Kids had elevated blood lead. People died from Legionnaire's disease. And this is a problem that we're seeing all around the country. As Dr. Anderson said, our existing system does not work. Our existing financing system does not work to help the people who most need it, because in America today, you get the infrastructure you can afford. And if you can't afford new pipes, that's just tough. No one's gonna force you to upgrade your infrastructure to protect your city from these breaks. But maybe if it's killing people, we'll think twice about that. Now to illustrate this, I'll just use another example of St. Joseph, Louisiana. This is a city we worked on just late last year, but again, this is another predominantly minority community. They've lost a lot of people. They simply cannot afford to upgrade their water system. And this is what the drinking water in St. Joseph looks like. And it's horrible. And just like in Flint, when these poor community folks were complaining about the water, the state would say that the water looks bad, but it's safe to drink.
Jesus.
So what are you going to do? Okay, Flint is paying amongst the highest water rates in the world for water that we now know at that time was not suitable for anything but flushing toilets. Okay, as long as you have to bathe in, shower in, or drink. And Flint's water rates, unless nothing's done, they're going to double in the next 5 years. People in Flint are already paying more for their water bill than their mortgage. So this is the death spiral. So you got the same situation here in St. Joe. What are we going to do about this? Well, St. Joe's in such bad shape. These are violations of federal law that the EPA reported to St. Joe over a time period of just 10 years. I don't know if anyone there is even opening the mail. Okay, that's the reality. They can't afford to meet federal law. And we have no way to get state or federal money in to help places like St. Joe. So I asked the rhetorical question, thinking back to the Roman times, is this civilization as we know it? And the answer is obviously no. For these people who have been left behind, it's not. So, I take the approach, if you shine a light on these injustices, people will step up and do the right thing. And perhaps that's naive, perhaps that's optimistic, but that's who I am, so that's where we go. So I worked with an amazing professor at LSU, and just like in Flint, when we went and measured this water, we found that in many homes the water was not safe. It was actually exceeding lead limits. So this was kind of a game changer, because that broke up the talking point that the water looks like crap and it's safe to drink. It got people thinking, and they're like, oh, we don't want another Flint, because Flint has cost, to date, for the city of 100,000 people, $700 million in U.S. money. It's $60,000 per child is floating to Flint since this disaster. So eventually they came to their senses, and they said, we got to help these people. The state wanted to help, but they couldn't, because they had to have a signature from the mayor before they could get $6 million in state funding. And the mayor wouldn't sign it because they'd been skimming money from the state budget, and he didn't want the budget audited. And so as a result, for several months, this grant designed to fix the water system could not get there because of this corruption. But finally, they did do the audit, and as of, this is December 2016, they declared a public health emergency, and they're now going to be able to get some state money. But I just say this because this exemplifies the type of problem that we're seeing all around America. Not so much in our bigger, well-funded, wealthy cities where we can still fix pipe proactively. But for these parts of America that have been left behind, the post-industrial cities like Flint, where you have to borrow from tomorrow to pay for today, or rural America, which is being devastated in terms of population loss. And there was a huge article on this in USA Today where they used Ranger, Texas as an example to talk about how our fellow Americans in rural America are not being protected by federal law. And no one seems to care, and little kids are getting hurt. They're getting hurt from high lead in their water. These residents are getting hurt because the water isn't suitable for normal use. And people are dying as well. So you ask, what is it going to take to get these kind of things fixed? So with that, if you can play the film clip I have. Oh,
the saddest thing about this leak
you turn the volume up?
it would have cost to prevent it all.
The fix was about $100 a day.
Is there any way to turn the volume up?
Avoided for just that small amount of money.
$100 a day.
Well, this is not.
Why didn't you say something? I want to call out to all my people in Africa right now watching The Daily Show. Because my friends, for only $100 a day, we can save a village in America and get these people drinking the water that they so badly need for just the price of 5 cups of coffee in New York.
Okay, so you get so Trevor Noah goes on, he goes, look at what's happening in Flint. I'm calling out to all my friends in Africa. Please give just a few dollars a day. We can save an American village and get them the clean water they need. So, you have to laugh or else you cry, but that's what it takes. We're kind of an international embarrassment with good reason, because if you kind of judge your society by how you treat your most vulnerable, we don't look very good right now when it comes to how our fellow citizens in Flint, Michigan, and other impoverished parts of America are being treated at present. So with that, I'll just conclude. This is a game changer. Because what we know now is that these old pipes and bad designs can kill people. Okay? From lead and Legionella. Secondly, neglecting this water infrastructure problem is expected to increase problems with these opportunistic pathogens, which we're learning more and more about every day. Now we've got the biggest problem with our oldest infrastructure. In the meantime, we're creating even more problems with our newer infrastructure, because we're not designing that to save water and energy and protect public health. And we really need to start researching this. I mean, it's not really acceptable, in my opinion, to just let this one group at Virginia Tech fund this with the volunteer efforts of students. And we have had some great funding from the National Science Foundation and water utilities. But the issue is who's going to step up and take responsibility for this problem. Now, I'd once hoped that my old friends in the water industry, where I used to dedicate most of my life, I was a proud member of AWJ for 25 years, before I realized that they had an agenda to highlight water problems. And unfortunately, that agenda is kind of extending to Legionella problems as well. It's a responsibility they don't want to have. So I quit that organization, even though 99% plus of what they do is great. When it comes to this issue, they honestly make the tobacco industry proud. Okay? And you hope that they learned something from Flint, Michigan, they'd step up, they'd fund research, they'd accept responsibility. So what do we get? Unfortunately, what we get is seminars on how to avoid litigation problems at water utilities. The concern that they might get sued from lead poisoning of children or Legionella deaths in homes. And one of my second lessons I've learned in my life is one sure way